I'm Pramod Achan. I'm a consultant orthopaedic surgeon in London. My NHS, which is public practice, is based around St Bartholomew's Hospital, which is the oldest hospital in England, celebrating its 900th anniversary in 2023, so 2 years ago now. I actually went to medical school there, trained in my residency program there, did a fellowship in the US for 6 months at NYU and for 6 months in Queensland, Australia, before I got appointed as an attending at Barts in 2005. So I'm coming up to 20 years as an attending. And in that interim, I've been running the residency program as well as having been chief of orthopedics there for 10 years. It's been an incredible journey for me, but eventually I've given up my trauma practice and principally work as a hip and knee arthroplasty and soft tissue surgeon. I have an established private practice now too, which is where I am talking to you today from. I've also had a history in leadership in healthcare, and by virtue of that, I've got a master's from Cornell in healthcare leadership, all of which evolved while I was doing my chief of orthopedic role. And by virtue of that, I got to travel, so things called a traveling fellowship. I did the Hip Society's traveling fellowship in 2009 and was an ABC traveling fellow in 2014. The 2009 journey took me to Salt Lake City, where Chris Peters, who's a hip surgeon there, hosted us. And through that, we developed a friendship because he was such an inspirational guy, doing the kind of work that we see here in the communities that we're dealing with, particularly in public practice. We see very complex hip cases, often ignored, coming from third world countries to the UK and being based in East London, but also cases that have been neglected from home. Because it's a very socio-economically deprived community. So our visit with Chris and the University of Utah was really an eye-opener on our tour, where we visited over 9 centers in seeing really tricky pathology that needed complex surgery to get good outcomes. And what was good for those patients was very different to what was good for a fit and healthy and driven, motivated patient that we'd normally see in our private practice, for instance. So that was my first exposure to Salt Lake City, and it's a friendship that has then blossomed. We've had Chris over to talk to our residents here, as well as Tom Higgins, a trauma surgeon from Utah. And I often, if there's any chance of anyone passing through the States who either as a foot and ankle fellow or a spine fellow, I always point them in the direction of the University of Utah, because I think they run a great program. And I think I touched on it earlier, talking about leadership, that what Charles Saltzman did there in building a unit, trying to build academic infrastructure, residency programs, fellowship programs, they were all things that I picked up on my visit and then tried to emulate and grow from in our own system here. One thing that struck me on both the ABC and the Hip Society Traveling Fellowship, and bear in mind I've then maintained those relationships by inviting people over here, is that the landscape is very different to what it was when I was a trainee. For reasons that are unclear to me, there were walls that were built, there were bridges that were burnt, and somehow the collaborative influence, and I remember talking in Boston with Bill Harris about this, because in his generation, everyone with an interest in arthroplasty had come to the UK at some point to visit Wrightington, to visit Exeter, to visit Mike Freeman at our hospital in London. And yet now they'd moved more towards places like Gants, and the thinking was that the opportunity for collaboration with the UK had diminished. And one of the things that was very much front and center in my mind was this opportunity to rekindle that, because there is no doubt in my mind that opportunity for collaboration to see how things can be done differently. And I'm not saying that either country is better at one thing or the other, but these are incredibly bright people, incredibly bright surgeons, and we always enjoy each other's company, especially discussing the cases that were difficult or didn't go to plan, and we can learn from those discussions. So what has changed dramatically from my kind of training period is the ability to collaborate. And COVID played its part with us going online and Zoom interactions. And you can see it now with the British Hip Society running these international webinars where we're inviting guests from abroad. But within my own department, we are sending trainees everywhere we can. We've just started an exchange program with Tygerberg University in Cape Town in South Africa, where one of our residents will go and spend 6 months there doing high energy trauma, but in a very supervised and evaluated and brilliant training environment. We've then developed a similar relationship with UCSF, where we have an exchange program just for a week where 2 of our residents go there and we host 2 of their residents. So to answer the question around collaborative opportunity, I think it's phenomenal. My time in Salt Lake City would identify that for me as a unique place where we could build this. And yet we haven't managed to overcome some of the hurdles. I think being foreign medical graduates, the assurance from me that these are exceptional trainees who will fulfill everything that's wanted from them and contribute as much as they take away, has still not managed to filter through the system. And so the most we've had in terms of visits are observerships where people have gone, spent a few days picking either Chris or Tom Higgins or Charlie Saltzman's brain, and come away with ideas that they can then develop. I would love to set up a residency exchange program in the short term. It could just be for a week, where your residents could come here and see what we do, but equally our residents could come there and see what you do. And it's not just learning about how to do an operation or what to do when an operation goes wrong. It's how you set the room up, how you set your processes up. I think we can learn from each other's financial pressures, working with limited resource. I think if we move then to training and education, what we're doing well, what we're doing badly. If you look at research opportunity, we built a research department up from scratch in all 3 phases. So basic science research, translational, lab to bench to bedside, and then clinical trials, where we now have one of the biggest clinical trials units. We obviously contribute to the National Joint Registries. All of this is stuff that our guys would be happy to talk about, but equally there's stuff that you're doing that we don't have the resource or access to that we would love to. And I remember even going back to 2009 when I was there, you were doing some work on hip modeling that was just fascinating, in your research lab. So I think there's a massive opportunity.
If you could have your best case scenario for the future, how would that involve collaborations on not just the training for residents and fellows, but even partnering on research programs?
Absolutely. So, like I said earlier, when I first got appointed as an attending here, we didn't really have any research infrastructure. And part of these visits were for me to pick the brains of great people who'd walked before me in that journey, but also to get the best from everywhere. And I won't lie, I stole some of the ideas from Salt Lake City for sure. But what we have now is a really solid academic infrastructure. And I've got a clinical lecturer who's one of my residents who's taken time out, done a PhD, and she's working with big data. And she set up a big data collaboration now through Johns Hopkins, but we've got 6 of the biggest centers in the world collecting big data and collaborating with that. So that's kind of the data piece collaboration. With clinical trials, I think there's an opportunity. With new implant development, I think there's an opportunity. We've had Mohit Bhandari, who's now the editor of the JBJS, but probably the person in global orthopedics who works on the biggest scale clinical trials. He's been over, talked to us. We've sent people over to McMaster with him. And, so I think that opportunity of pulling a unit with the reputation and brand of University of Utah would be a phenomenal opportunity, I think, and we'd love to do that.
Is AI the elephant in the room that people aren't talking about, or is there any process that will overlap into the future?
Yeah, so AI is just a buzzword at the moment, and for me, I think we've got to be a bit careful about jumping on the bandwagon. We've always, in orthopedics, been at the forefront, for me, of innovation. And this is not just in North America and Europe, in Asia, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, our South African colleagues, they're all doing it. So there's a global movement towards innovation, being at the cutting edge, improving what we can for our patients. and yet not trying to protect our territory by halting change and development. I say that with the caveat that algorithms that computers run to come to decision making is not artificial intelligence, right? And we've got to be a bit careful about the move towards robotics and the move towards algorithm-based learning or process driven, processes that are driven by algorithm, and understand that actually AI is when the machine starts to learn and starts to influence or change our practice. And I don't think in orthopedics we're there quite yet, but I think it is a very exciting space. The key thing is that we all get our minds together and run projects collaboratively that can explore where we go with this, rather than jumping on the bandwagon quickly with an unrefined product which one center or one great mind has come up with, that actually then never translates to actually meaningful patient-facing benefit. So it is an elephant in the room because it's so hot, but equally we've all got to work together really sensibly. Small steps, rewind, see what we've achieved, and at what point is the machine starting to influence decision making ahead of all these global experts who've got years and years of experience. If you take radiology as an example, the transition from wet film to digital imaging made algorithms to interpret and then machine learning a really predictable and obvious quick benefit. And we've seen that in the management of stroke. We're now seeing it in fracture assessment, classification, suggestion for treatment plans. But whether we have that ability to deal with the complex orthopedic patient, where we still need to take a history, we need to find out what their comorbidities are, we need to look and evaluate the joint above, the joint below, the joint in question. Whether a machine is ready to do that yet, honestly, I think the answer is no, and that's absolutely to the credit of my colleagues around the world who are such brilliant clinicians who are able to make all of that assessment with their years of learning and experience and then do what's right for the patient. So I don't think it's going to be quick, but it is going to happen. We've got to be part of it, and that's where I see this big data collaboration as being huge steps.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time.
No, it's a pleasure.